After a routine drop-off, a 26-year-old mom of two is never seen again. That is until 2 months later when a horrific discovery was made in a brush area off a highway in Minnesota. On March 31st of 2023, Madeline Kingsbury dropped off her 5-year-old and 2-year-old children at a daycare. But things took a turn when her family and friends said they had no contact with her since. The father of Madeline's children told police he left their home right after, and when he came back, she was gone. Police say that morning she was supposed to go to work, but also never showed. She normally was the one to pick up her children from daycare that afternoon, but also never made it, which police say was extremely out of character for her. A week later, with still no sign from Madeline, the Winona police chief said during a press conference her disappearance was involuntary, suspicious, and they were concerned for her safety. The community rallied together to help Madeline's loved ones search for her, with nearly 2,000 people helping in the efforts. Officials asked local residents to check their properties, including doorbell cameras, for any sign of a van passing through or stopping at any point on April 1st. Search crews continued their work for months, even searching the Mississippi River, but no sign of Madeline. Months after she vanished, her children's father, Adam Fravel, filed for custody of their children. However, a judge denied that request and ordered the young children to stay with Madeline's parents, who cared for them since her disappearance. But 2 days after a judge denied Fravel's request for custody, a discovery was made off Highway 43 near the town of Mabel, Minnesota.
We are here today to announce that human remains were found yesterday in Fillmore County. This morning, the Southern Minnesota Regional Medical Examiner's Office performed an autopsy. Law enforcement has confirmed the remains are those of Madeline Kingsbury. Unfortunately, while this discovery is not what we were hoping for, we are thankful to be able to bring Maddie home to her family. Her body was found by a Fillmore County investigator on a remote stretch of road off Highway 43 north of Mabel at approximately 1:30 p.m. yesterday afternoon. Digital evidence collected by investigators led us to this area. It should be noted that the location of Maddie's body was off a low-maintenance public roadway and was not property owned by the Fravel family or any of their relatives. The area had been previously searched, but Maddie's body was covered and concealed in such a manner that she was not visible.
Fravel was subsequently taken into custody when the remains were found and charged with suspicion of second-degree murder. Fravel denied having any involvement with her disappearance. He said in a statement, quote, "During these last 12 days, I have cooperated with law enforcement at every turn, including sitting down for multiple interviews with Winona County law enforcement. I did not have anything to do with Maddie's disappearance. I want the mother of my 5-year-old and 2-year-old to be found and brought home safely. I want that more than anything." But after officials confirmed the remains were of Madeline, Fravel was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. The case went to trial in the fall of this year. According to prosecutors, Madeline was strangled with a towel and likely died of asphyxiation. The towel used in the murder, along with the bedsheet that Madeline's body was found wrapped in, matched items found in their home. Witnesses who testified told the jurors Madeline was planning to leave Fravel for another man after she got frustrated with his abusive behavior. One witness recalled seeing bruises around her neck. Another testified she was on a video call with her when Fravel allegedly hit her. One friend testified that Fravel told Madeline that she would end up like Gabby Petito. Fravel reportedly chose not to testify in his own defense. But during closing arguments, Fravel's defense attorneys argued that investigators had tunnel vision and ignored anything that didn't fit into their narrative. On November 7th of this year, Fravel was found guilty on all counts for Madeline's death. He was sentenced in December, where Madeline's family reportedly gave emotional victim impact statements as they recalled the search for her and how Fravel treated her when she was alive. While he didn't choose to testify in his own defense, Fravel did have final words for the judge, declaring that he was innocent. He said, "I never caused harm to Maddie, and I am innocent. Thank you." Part of the reason we're able to keep bringing you this story, plus so much more like it, is because of our sponsors like Upside. So I want to thank Upside for sponsoring this story. If you're wondering what's Upside, well, it's a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, and restaurants. Sometimes I only have time for a quick lunch break, but then there are times I can have a nice sit down at a restaurant and I can use Upside for both. Plus, I can use Upside to get cash back when I do. It's so easy and simple to use and completely free, so why not? And And it's actual real cash back too. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer straight into your bank account. So here's what you do. You download the Upside app, claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or a credit card and follow the steps on the app and get paid. You can use Upside at places like Chipotle, 7-Eleven, Taco Bell, and so many other places. So why not check it out and see if your favorite spot is on the app? To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on your screen, use our promo code LC News and get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Again, that's promo code LC News for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. Since Fravel was convicted on charges of first-degree murder and second-degree murder, the former charge carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison, which in the end was the punishment he received with no chance of parole. The judge said his sentence will send a clear statement that such violence won't be tolerated in their community. And with Adam Fravel now spending the rest of his life in prison, let's bring on now criminal defense attorney and legal commentator Joe Tamburino. Joe, thank you so much for joining me. Take me back a little bit to last year when you first heard of this case. What was your reaction to Madeline Kingsbury's first initial disappearance to her subsequent murder?
Well, thank you for having me on. This case basically captivated the entire state, and I think the upper Midwest region, because what you had is somebody who just disappeared. And we know that people just don't disappear. And many times when people disappear, foul play is involved. So Ms. Kingsbury disappeared approximately March 31st of 2023. And then, unfortunately, she was found dead on June 7th, 2023. But during basically that 2-month period, there were so many search parties, so many people were involved to try to find her. And of course, we know what happened in the end. Very unfortunate.
Yeah, just a terrible, tragic situation altogether. What do you make of Adam Fravel kind of disposing of Madeline's remains in such a terrible way, essentially, because, this was the mother of his his two children, and then just to kind of throw her away and disregard her like trash. What do you make of the lengths that he went to cover up this murder?
A few things with that. First, Mr. Fravel is very similar to many other people who get criminally convicted for these types of charges in that they don't cover their tracks well. In today's world, and as you saw through this trial, there are so many ways that law enforcement and people in general can follow people's tracks, their movements, where they're going. In this case, what did we see? Well, we saw a plethora of different types of videos and recordings of Mr. Fravel in the van going to different locations in a mostly rural county in southeast Minnesota. The way that the body was disposed was very cold-hearted. There is no doubt about that. But again, didn't cover his tracks. DNA found on the sheets, locations that he was going through. Basically, they were able to track him that whole day except for about 45 minutes. So first, he didn't cover his tracks well. Second, obviously, the way that the murder happened and the way that the body was disposed shows cold blood. There is just no doubt about that. Third, the prior history of domestic abuse. What's so important in these types of domestic cases is what was the history between the parties? Was there domestic abuse? Was there physical abuse, verbal abuse, some types of neglect? In Minnesota, as in many other states, we have statutes that specifically target previous acts of domestic abuse, relationship evidence, and that was very important in this case.
And do you believe that's part of the reason why, initially he was charged with second-degree murder, but then later on they added, first-degree murder as well, too? Do you think that kind of had anything to do with it? Was just kind of that previous display of, domestic violence toward Madeline?
Yes, there were two factors in getting the grand jury indictment for 2 counts of first-degree murder, one being premeditated and the other being as a pattern of domestic abuse. I think that basically after all of the investigation was done, what they determined, they being the prosecutors, is they had enough evidence to go to a grand jury. Because in Minnesota, the only way you could get first-degree murder is through a grand jury, which is basically a group of 16 to 21 people, and you have to have more than 18. You have to have more than 18 to actually get the grand jury started, and out of that, you have to have 12 to get an indictment. So what they found, based on all of their investigation, is there was some planning. planning of forethought, some type of premeditation. So they brought that to the grand jury. And then they also found, through basically text messages, videos, friends and family, that Ms. Kingsbury had suffered from domestic abuse at Mr. Fravel's hands. So loaded with those two great pieces of evidence, they went to the grand jury. And when you get a first-degree murder charge, specifically with premeditation, you're looking at life without the possibility of parole.
The case, when it finally went to trial, was moved to a completely different county. Are you surprised by that decision? And talk to me a little bit about why that decision was made.
Well, first, I think it was the correct decision. But second, yes, I was surprised. And I'll tell you the reason for that. In Minnesota, obviously, the whole nation and world knows that this was ground zero for the George Floyd murder. And we had Derek Chauvin, who was prosecuted. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 21 years. They made motions in that case for a change of venue, and the judge denied it. And that was an internationally known case. But here we have Mr. Fravel's case in a town called Winona. And what they found by doing a survey of likely jurors is that he really couldn't get a fair jury in that county. And I was surprised because on the one hand, you have a case that's so well known as Chauvin being denied a change of venue. But then you have the other case, Mr. Fravel, though well known, not nearly as well known as Chauvin, yet he won a change of venue motion. So I was surprised, but after I read the judge's decision, I agreed with it.
And Adam Fravel, he was convicted last month, sentenced this month. Now, he didn't testify in his own defense during trial. But then right before he was being sentenced, when the judge asked him, is there anything else you'd like to say? He said, I didn't hurt Maddie. I am innocent. What do you make of him saying that, despite him not even testifying to say the same?
It's too little, too late. Here's the big question in all of these cases. Will the defendant testify? And, like in the Chauvin case, I was shocked that he didn't testify. When you're facing such serious charges, I know the rule of thumb. I've been a criminal defense attorney for 35 years. You want to try to keep your client off the stand. But when you're facing so much time, like in this case, natural life, one would think you would testify. You don't have to, and nobody could comment on your silence, but you would just think that you would, because this is your last chance. If you lose, you will die in prison. So I was surprised he didn't testify on his own behalf. And what he said at sentencing, unfortunately, it's quite common. People who don't testify, at sentencing time, they say they're innocent, that they didn't do it, there's some other circumstances, what have you. But really, the time for that was at trial.
This case is tragic, and a lot of other cases that we do cover here too, when you have domestic partnership where it turns to this fatal case, essentially, leaving behind now two young children who have to grow up now without their mother and without their father. What do you make of just everything that Madeline's family has been through over this last year?
It's horrific. And it's a credit to them that they were able to basically join forces and try to provide for these kids, as well as to try to give Ms. Kingsbury a dignified memorial and remembrance. And I think it's a credit to that whole family, the way they behaved throughout this whole process. It was very professional. And obviously, they loved Ms. Kingsbury and they cared deeply for her.
All right, Joe Tamburino, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. But before we sign you off, do you see Adam Fravel seeking appeal in his case?
Yes. In Minnesota, if you're convicted of first-degree murder, you have an automatic right to appeal, and you skip the Court of Appeals. You go straight to the Minnesota Supreme Court. However, the chances that this case would be overturned by the Supreme Court, I think, is very small, very slim.
All right, Joe Tamburino, again, thank you so much for your insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Adam Fravel will spend his life without parole sentence within the Minnesota Department of Corrections. He does have the opportunity to appeal his conviction and sentence at the Minnesota Supreme Court. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.